Yeah.
I'll kick us off.
Okay. Be my guest.
Welcome, everybody. This is the April 10th, 2025 meeting of the City of Portsmouth Housing Blue Ribbon Committee. And I'll call the roll. Tracy?
Here.
Andrew is not with us. Byron?
Here.
Eric?
Here.
Megan?
Here.
Jen may be joining us late.
joined.
Oh, she's online.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, Jen.
Perfect.
Mary is not with us. John O'Leary?
Yeah.
Okay. Assistant Mayor's here. I'm Councilor Tabor. Just roll along and do the minutes here. We caught up on a lot of minutes.
Mary's here.
Yes.
No, you're good. Thank you.
Has everyone had a chance to read them? Are there changes?
Good.
If there was something out of line, it was so long ago I don't remember.
I had a,
Guys tripped on my memory.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
thanks to Stephanie who caught us up. Some of the names are a little garbled from the video, but one correction is December 5th of 2024. Anna K. Vorstag was the speaker on behalf of Portsmouth Housing. Her last name is Vorstag.
Okay.
Okay.
So, but that does beg the question, who's going to be our minute taker?
Yeah, no, I just don't have bandwidth. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I can confirm with Stephanie
I was
if
just going
she'll
to say.
continue to do them.
if she can do it
I'll-
from the
I'll
video,
confirm,
that'd be
yeah.
great. Okay.
And we're recording?
And yeah,
Yeah, we're
recorded.
Oh, yeah, there it is. If you came, yeah, no, there it is. It's on. It's recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure it is.
So that settles that. And we had two big items of business tonight. First, we had Craig Welch with us from the PHA. You want to cue that up?
Yeah, so as kind of we started this journey now almost like over a year ago, we asked the PHA to kind of give us an update of their properties that they had, any redevelopment within their own properties. And so we've invited, based on a request from the committee, we've invited the Portsmouth Housing Authority to give us that update again. So we're really kind of excited to hear from them and again, a kind of status on their properties, if they're considering any updating or expanding of their current portfolio.
Yeah, that and where there might be opportunities for additional units and density on your existing land holdings, and Falkland Way. We might ask you about Falkland Way.
Should we also indicate that this was a request that came from the public through us to look in, I guess they call it value engineering or whatever they did anyways, relative to looking at the properties that are currently PHA properties and whether or not there's any opportunity to expand the housing on any of those sites, correct?
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Right. So Craig, we set a goal for ourselves of getting 500 units of below-market housing as a committee. Come on up and join us. And we relentlessly pursue that month after month.
Thank you, Councilor Tabor, Councilor Kelly. I think it's Vorsteg is Vorsteg.
Okay.
For the
You're right,
benefit of
okay,
the
yeah.
minutes.
Thank you.
Correction appropriate.
Yes.
And I served on the
concludes my
best
So thank you very much for the invite. I do really appreciate asking us to be here. And thanks for putting the Sherburne School in our hands. It's in good hands with us. We are on schedule to submit our first plan to the Technical Advisory Committee We'll have that in May, and our schedule has us getting a project approved in July, which will be perfect. We've done a ton of due diligence, all the geotechnical work that's required of not just the project, but of the technical advisory committee in the city, water and sewer flow tests, environmental reviews. We're updating the traffic study, the noise study. We've done a full structural evaluation of the school building itself, and we've done a specific evaluation of the cupola, which needs some real serious work in order to preserve that. And looking for some grant funding to help with that particular process. So historical study will be doing the determination of eligibility for the National Registry. We do believe it will be determined eligible for the National Registry. And yeah, like I said, a project fully approved in July. Somebody had mentioned, I think Peter had brought up the other day about threats in the current funding environment. So I think it goes without saying that any construction project in the country sees threats in this current environment. And, also with a tremendous amount of uncertainty, really, in all aspects of the economy in every region in the United States and even throughout the world. And some of them are really significant. These projects, affordable housing projects, are always hard. Even without what we're doing now, they're always hard, and they require a great deal of persistence and creativity, and in this environment even more so. There are potential negative impacts here to both market rate and affordable housing around the country. Obviously, a combination of steep spikes in material cost, while cuts in capital subsidy will shrink both sides, will affect both sides of the ledger, both the sources and uses. But having said all that, we believe and we are committed to continuing to move forward. Uncertainty can go either way. And the only way we can move these projects forward is to continue to invest in them and be ready to go in these kind of environments. We've dealt with complexity before, and it's something that's happening with all affordable housing developers in the country. There's a tremendous amount of fear and emotion in the marketplace right now, but history proves that that kind of stuff does ebb and flow. We remain aspirational about energy efficiency and renewable energy, which is really important to us. But as you know, to achieve the long-term benefits of that you need to make a lot of upfront investments. And so those are the kind of things that are threatened. We believe that the low-income housing tax credit program, which is funding all affordable housing units or construction in the United States, will be maintained. And that's already scarce, but I believe that will be maintained. If that program, for some reason, were to be cut, there's 1,000 to 2,000 affordable housing projects in the country that will come to a complete halt. We are seeing signs of subcontractors being really eager for work, which is a positive sign, and wanting to get work into their pipeline. So we do anticipate some aggressive bidding on projects when that time comes. So that's all going well. I also want to go backwards and just applaud the City Council for making a really aggressive and thoughtful policy priority to use city-owned land for this kind of thing. It's was a courageous decision, and I think the work of this committee has really been outstanding. Everything I listened to throughout the process, I think people were really smart and really thoughtful with their approach on this committee. So I want to thank you for that too. When I received this invitation, to come, the first thing I thought of was that a better presentation was not going to come from me, or that the committee would be really well served by hearing from the Director of Multifamily Finance from the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, Ryan Pope. And I was going to make that recommendation to extend an invite to Ryan, but I did speak with him, and he wouldn't have been able to accept that invitation for tonight. But I'll be happy to give you, staff and chairs his contact information and encourage you to invite him, because he can give you a big picture scenario of what's happening in affordable housing finance, around the country, but specifically in New Hampshire, and what kind of constraints and everything we're dealing with.
And he was the Dover Housing Navigator.
Yes, he was outstanding as the housing navigator in Portsmouth. Outstanding enough to be hired for a pretty senior job at the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. He has a banking background too, which is been really helpful, and coming from having some roots in the private sector as well. So I'm happy to pass that on with your agenda, but with my recommendation for that, for your future meetings. I do want to take this opportunity to say that I do believe that Portsmouth would benefit from us sort of revisiting and reframing the role of the PHA within the city. That, it was the first sign I saw of a pivot on that was when the city was out walking land, city-owned land, for the idea to build, potentially build more housing without us receiving an invitation to do that. And given the sort of knowledge and the expertise that we have and our understanding of the marketplace, that was a missed opportunity to me, and I think was just kind of the first sign that there was something that had that our relationship had evolved into something that was not our traditional role as a partner in the city to more like a vendor. And so I, also want to say, I know you invited me here to talk about our properties and stuff, but I think that would be well worth the exercise. I think the committee voting to do a sole source contract with POA on your next project, I think is the opposite of doing so, and we would. I think POA is a great organization, but I think prior to that, I think it would be important for us to sort of reframe our relationship, and that even that we would be in charge of that RFP process for finding a joint venture and being a part of whatever you have next in the pipeline. In regards to our, new city-owned property or new projects that we have, I'll first say we are laser focused on Sherburne School. That is a really challenging project, and that's where we're spending time. We have evaluated a lot of opportunities, including helping the city to evaluate opportunities over the last several years, and I think Sherburne was the smart, first one to go after. And so we are very focused on that, and we're not doing due diligence on other parcels, but we're happy to talk to the city about what that would look like if you have other parcels that you wanted to study, and how we would work with you on that. And so I think we could add some value to that. As you know, we own 13 properties throughout the city, and there's the first properties that were built. We were very prolific developers in our first 14 years, between Gosling being built in 1959 and the Margison being the last public housing property that was built. All of those properties are held in what's called a deed of trust, so there's no debt on them. and we own them outright, but we're restricted from doing anything with them. We can't sell them or refinance them or anything like that. But that is changing now. And so we now have an opportunity to gain complete ownership of those properties in a way that will allow us to bring new tax credits and be able to refinance those properties, which would open up some opportunities to either redevelop or just rehab or even reposition some of our properties. When I say reposition, right now we are exclusively sort of independent, rental apartments, but there's a strong need for all kinds of housing, including more assisted living type of housing, and you could see us transitioning or repositioning a property or more into sort of some kind of specialized housing. The biggest property, well, Margerson has the most number of units, but the biggest property we have is Gosling Meadows. It's also the oldest. It's on 11 acres of land, very valuable commercial real estate. Might have known that we did a charrette project with the Workforce Housing Coalition many years ago and haven't gone further than that, other than doing a survey and starting to consider what might be possible there. And if you, if there you could have a mix of the housing that's already there, but also includes some 4-story garden-style apartments and a mix of market rate or affordable apartments, then there's big opportunities there to add some units, and that is going to be possible. Ideally done in phases, but the infrastructure there is pretty old, and so there's some impediments to doing it in phases, but mostly there's really just not enough capital subsidy and not enough tax credits in New Hampshire to do what would be a, $80 or $100 million redevelopment project out there. So I would anticipate something like that would go in phases. The other properties like Feaster and Margerson are in pretty dense communities. The Woodbury Avenue property, it's a beautiful property and a great place, but you could see an opportunity there to reconfigure or add units there, or even subdivide off some housing lots and have a combination of that. Obviously, the abutter, it's actually not the direct abutter. It's not 40 Bedford Way, but Manor Drive or Boyd Street. It's not called Boyd Road.
Yeah.
Chinburg is doing a big project there next door, and you can see that where the cursor just was is the Portsmouth Senior Center. Excuse me. The former Dobles Center, if you, there you go. Yep. Near the traffic circle. So there's the Senior Center right there. And then to the north east, right there is the Woodbury Manor property. It's 10 buildings, 40 units there. And in between the Senior Center and Woodbury Avenue, there's what's commonly referred to as a paper street. The street was never built there, but that's what's on the tax map. And so you do have, you could do something really cool by combining some senior housing with that senior center and including that. But as you know, if you want to start working on multiple sites in the city at the same time, you've got a lot of community engagement that you have to do. We haven't approached any neighbors or talked about any of the possibilities of doing that. But the city also owns lot 17416, which is in front of the Doble Center, in front of the senior center. There's a small 2-bedroom Cape-style home there that was purchased by the city in anticipation that there was going to be something going on at the senior center. So you could see that, if you combine that paper street, give us a 0 lot line, right up to the senior center, and then doing something with Woodbury Avenue, or the Woodbury complex, that there would be an opportunity to thoughtfully add some units there. That's very easy, easy on and off the highway. It is in a residential neighborhood. You could also see the opportunity of subdividing house lots on that property along Woodbury Avenue. Would also potentially make for a nice development and something that's really cohesive to that neighborhood. And again, that's one of the first 6 public housing properties, so it's a process to go through, and we haven't done it yet with any of our properties, but nationwide, the federal government wants to get out of the public housing business and turn those properties over, and they would really look like financially and regulatory structure of all of the new projects that we've done since 1996 with the low-income housing tax credit program. State Street and Pleasant Street are very, very small, and I don't see ability to really add too many units there, or at least not enough that would be commensurate with the kind of effort that it would take. Obviously, you're looking for the opportunities to add the most amount of units with the least amount of impact on a neighborhood and someplace that's a good site to develop. Sherburne was definitely that. Wamisit is not a public housing property, but when you do, we bought that, but it was completely rebuilt using tax credits back in and was finished in 2011. With the tax credit program, the investor who buys those credits is able to take the benefits of those credits and the losses for 10 years after they invest in those tax credits. There's still another 5 years of compliance and regulatory stuff that they need to go through. And so in our business, you'll hear the term 15-year exit. So after 15 years, that's when the investor or the limited partner gets out of the property, and then it's fully owned by the general partner, which is us, and we're the controlling partner now anyway and manage it. So that is 2026 is for Wamisit. Wamisit does have some, it has some big maintenance things that you would want to tackle at the time if you want to recapitalize that or resyndicate it with tax credits. But you could also, if you look at that parcel about how wide Holiday Drive is, and that these are 2-story structures, and in that zone with 10 different buildings in that particular zone, you could argue that that would be a location where some 4-story garden-style apartments phased over time might also be a good opportunity. Unless you guys make a major move here and move City Hall or a portion of it, then I don't see a possibility to add any units like right here to the Connors Cottage. But obviously you're studying the possibilities here. And Lafayette School, you would have to get rid of a playground and that kind of thing. So we wouldn't add any units there, although the 15-year exit is happening on that right now because it's been 15 years. You asked specifically about Atlantic Heights. That we always saw as the best opportunity. You've got a really flat, easily accessible piece of land. The thing you see where it says Bedford Way You can see the 30 units of former Atlantic Heights School is 30 units of senior age-restricted housing. One concept that we had when we sort of envisioned something a long time ago is to do a land swap with the city. You'll see the portion of the land that goes, to the northwest. That's a difficult to develop piece. There's kind of it would be difficult to sort of develop something in back of that, but to do a land swap with the city, if there was a benefit to the city, and with the portion you'll see in that field right there at Bedford Way, that PHA owns half of that, combined with that city parcel, then that would be a really nice. That could be a really nice opportunity there, either to add on to, expand a senior living use there, or do something that's similar to, a multifamily property, or do something that's similar to what is existing at Atlantic Heights now. Obviously, unlike Sherburne, there are, residential homes that could be as close as 20 feet from a new building there. So you're building in a really dense residential neighborhood, and that comes with, its own challenges, but own opportunities. That would be a really great place. So, but like I said, we haven't done due diligence. We haven't done any engineering or considered any of those, and especially as we're focused on Sherburne School in this kind of environment, that's really what we're focused on. But happy to be helpful as you consider some other options here in the city.
Great. Questions to follow up?
Open discussion with the committee. Any questions? Feel free.
Seeing you started off with Sherburne, I'll go there. A couple of things. One is you talked about the challenges, and we all live in this environment, so we know what's going on. Is there a plan B?
If a plan B for
If basically the financing mechanism that's tied to the federal government at this point in time is not available, do you have a plan B?
the plan B would, what would most likely happen is that we would be delayed a year at the very least. And maybe that environment would change. And reality, during this last funding round, this is the problem in New Hampshire. I mean, it's hard to get these things designed and financed and approved, but then 16 projects in New Hampshire applied to this tax credit program, and only 5 were funded.
Sure.
They only had the ability to do 5. So even in that case, now we're 2 for 2 in the past 5 years getting awarded those credits.
Sure.
But if we didn't award those didn't get an award of those credits, we'd be in the same boat as all those other projects, which basically means reapplying the next year. And but without those credits, that would really it's sort of impossible to have a plan B that includes something without those. Today, I don't know what happened today in Concord, but the House was debating the budget. House finance proposal had some $600 million being cut, or reduction in spending out of the state budget. One piece, most of what we there's not a lot of state subsidy for this kind of stuff, other than an affordable housing fund, might be called an affordable housing trust fund, at the state that has a dedicated funding source. Now, anything with a dedicated funding source is better, and that affordable housing fund is funded directly through a portion up to $25 million coming from the real estate transfer tax. Having said that, they still find ways to raise that money and put that kind of money into a general fund when there's budgets that need to be cut. A full funding of that affordable housing fund and keeping that, as the law says, through the real estate transfer tax is a piece of advocacy that we're doing hard now with the legislature and the governor, because that can provide that kind of gap financing. If things like that go away, we're scouring for other sources all over the place. There is still money in the pipeline for renewable energy and energy efficiency. We've got Eversource, for instance, that's it's not like a public funding program, but they're going to contribute to electrifying this building and doing some more energy efficiency work on it. So there's those things we can try to pull off of Capital Magnet Fund. We're going to end up doing a twin 4%, 9% tax credit deal, so there'll be some additional opportunities to fund this. So it's something hard that gets harder. So
I'm guessing that Plan B, if I can just, is basically to reapply in another year.
Right.
And in effect, delay it for a year. I mean,
Right.
Just cutting through everything.
Right.
And again, I appreciate that. I, appreciate the honesty with regards to that, because, I mean, that's what we need to do is to look and say, okay, if things, and again, as you're somewhat alluding to, and the fact is that administrations change and things happen, and funding mechanisms that may not be here today may be here in another 4 years. But I mean, that's the reality. That's the reality of your business, and that's the reality that we're dealing with.
Right.
Correct. So I appreciate, appreciate that. So thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes, and just with relation to that comment, you said at a minimum it'd be 1 year, and that's just with just respect to reapplying, right? So, but you said it with some authority that the Sherburne project would, at the maximum, only be delayed 1 year. But I still don't understand, because you'll submit for funding sources, competitive funding sources, without the assurance that you'll be a successful, awardee. So
Yes.
So where you say it would be guaranteed, that it's only going to be 1 year, that is, I just want some interpretation to say, you said it with some authority, and I don't know that that's really, the way things go in the financing into this thing.
Yeah, right. I don't think I said only.
No.
Okay, all right.
Forgive
Maybe
me.
I got it wrong, but-
If I can, you said, what I heard was it would be at least a 1 year, because you couldn't apply for another year.
Right.
So and that's what I heard anyway, so.
All right, fair.
Right.
No, that's fair.
And-
And so while you're going through the process without any funding source at this time, through TAC, through the city process, to see if you can advance the project, at least on paper, that will still proceed.
Yes, we're making a significant investment in all of the pre-development costs, and we'll have a significant amount, hundreds of thousands at risk. That's our risk in order to do that. But that's real estate development,
Right.
and whether it's affordable housing or otherwise. I mean, there are market rate developers who are pressing pause on a lot of things, because if we're building a 70,000 square foot wood frame building and wood prices go up by 25%, that's a big pivot to be able to do that. But you have to, the need is just enormous, and so we really need to keep going. In some cases, we end up being very grateful, and you saw this for everybody, for the city or municipalities or anybody around the country. People were really grateful that you were shovel ready when things like the Inflation Reduction Act or ARPA came along, and there was some stimulus that came along that needed to be spent quickly. And so all of a sudden you had shovel-ready projects ready to go. You really took advantage of that. I was surprised that the LMI solar program through the State Department of Energy only had a small amount of funding and thought for sure they would be way oversubscribed. But because we had already done a sustainability plan, already had things that were in the works, we ended up applying for that money and just finished our first solar array at Atlantic Heights. And we ended up applying again for Margison, and we were just ahead of everybody else. So we were just awarded a grant, and so a new roof and a new solar array will be going on top of Margison Apartments with that grant money. Another example of just being ready to go. So, so that would be our intent, is to be ready to go. But we are in the same boat as everybody else, either market rate developers or affordable housing developers around the country.
Sorry, this is awkward. I guess I'm just curious, just with everything going on in the world, what are we thinking proactively about, like, what happens if funding gets dissolved or revoked for, like, the housing choice voucher program, and, like, what are we going to do to help keep all of those individuals in a safe living environment without like having it all come back? Because my understanding is, when we learned from like the welfare department, if folks are already living here as a city, we want to help them, support them, and keep them there. And so I'm curious if those conversations are happening, and what are we going to do?
We've closed our wait list for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the Section 8 voucher program. We're evidence that elections matter. And so those are closed, and we're not issuing any more vouchers. That some of those vouchers will come off because of attrition. We do such a great job with that we're consistently oversubscribed for those vouchers, and so we don't have a lot of HUD-held reserves, which is a good thing to have these days. We don't want HUD to be holding reserves, so we spend everything we can right now. But right now we've shut off our wait list, you know, part of it is not just the number of vouchers that we issue, but part of the equation with your budget authority is how much money is required in the subsidy for each one of those, because you'll pay 30% of your income in rent. So that, what we call HAP, or the housing assistance payments, what will happen in a down economy is that, you know, you could still have the same number of vouchers on the street, but the need for more subsidy on each one of them will go up, which will further force the numbers, the amount of vouchers to go down. And I anticipate that there won't be cuts to the Section 8 program, and we're sort of a special designated agency, a moving to work agency right now, so we do have a mechanism to keep more of those vouchers in the city of Portsmouth. When you get a Section 8 voucher from us, you don't have to use it here. You can use it in and around the region, but we have a mechanism with these project-based vouchers to keep more of those in Portsmouth. But the need is certainly great, and we'll do the best we can, and advocacy for that kind of stuff matters. I mean, the budget cuts to the state, obviously, we're talking about housing here, but we house a lot of people with developmental disabilities and mental disabilities and physical disabilities. We house a lot of people who are in the workforce who depend on child care subsidies. Child care, if you have children, you know that's sort of debilitating costs at many levels. So it's all those things that also are going to are impacting the 1,000 people that we serve right now. So it's ugly. It's ugly.
Other questions?
Byron?
Thanks. I had a couple. So you mentioned earlier around. Okay, so the there's no debt in the properties. You can't sell them by deed, but this is changing now. Can you expand a little bit on sort of why this is changing now specifically relative to this?
It started as a demonstration program, and in fact, it's still called by that name, and HUD has all kinds of bad names and acronyms. So this program is called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, if you would, if you want to Google that, or the RAD program. That you could find a lot of examples around the country about things that people have done. So we just end up getting title to the property. The initial goal was that, so we, in order to keep our properties updated, to do major capital improvements, all of these public housing properties are over 50 years old. And so we get money through the capital grant program directly from HUD. We have, reality is too, we have about $4 million in exposure on federal grants as well. In one way, we're kind of a federal contractor. So, and the thing that would maybe be most threatened is that capital grant program. The capital grant program has never been funded enough to keep up with the capital needs in the existing housing portfolio. So you've got billions and billions in unmet, in dollars that are unmet needs in this housing portfolio. So these public housing, I mean, I think we do a great job. We have an excellent portfolio, but there's a lot of places that have to, are eliminating public housing, or it's in terrible shape. So the only way to solve that is you can either increase funding for these capital improvements with the 3,000 housing authorities nationwide, or you can say, we're not doing that at all anymore, but here's the property. Congratulations, you own it now, and then you can figure it out. So the original idea was to rehab and modernize these facilities, just because there wasn't enough to do anything. We're doing a big, it's entirely funded by others, but we've got a $1.4 million HVAC project going on at Feaster Apartments right now. The total grant that we get every year is $1.4 million. So you're trying to keep up 200 or 421 units of public housing with just, sometimes that can just fund one project, and there's greater needs than that. So that's the reason why, but it also gives us title to the property. So if you wanted to reposition it or give us the ability to knock it all down, then we could do that. It is a process. There's, it's not, there is a process. You have to do capital needs. You have to have a lot of resident meetings. You have to, go through the process. But that's kind of what's happening around the country, is people getting into this RAD program. I've thought that delaying that has been a good strategy, thinking that the federal government is either going to sweeten the pot and make that easier, or they're going to make it harder or they're going to be lack of incentives that are going to push you to going into that RAD program. And jury's still out on that, but that's our approach.
I imagine in a place like Portsmouth, those properties have a lot of value, and so being able to own those outright has the upside versus rent. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you mentioned, let's see. So you mentioned Wamisit, and I know across behind Bolorama, there's like the Ledgewood Winchester area, and there were, if I have my correct, there were at one point vouchers associated with those. And is there any sort of PHA connection to those properties anymore?
Well, we'd love to own that development.
Okay.
We'd be a great buyer. That's a a place where conceptually the city could be available for some bond financing or something like that if we were to try to compete.
To the high school.
Yeah, I mean that would be a great one to own. Those apartments are all under the payment standard, so all eligible for Section 8 housing. The group that owns Ledgewood decided to stop accepting Section 8 vouchers. We've tried to make that against the law for people to be discriminated against, because the only reason is because there's they have a Section 8 voucher, but there's other there's other competing forces that where they have every right to say, we're just not accepting people with vouchers. Sometimes they do. Sometimes there's transfers and that kind of stuff. So there's fewer vouchers being there. Our best partner in the community is Osprey Landing. I think we might have 70 or 80 vouchers in Osprey Landing, and it's very well managed and
mix over
important to
there,
us.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the last question I had was on Atlantic Heights. You sort of alluded to the difficulty of the area behind the senior housing that's there now. Maybe just a little bit more about what specifically is difficult about that. Is it easement? Is it topography? Like, what's the,
Topography. My grandmother would call it hummocks, but I don't know if that's even a word. But it's topography. It's not necessarily a big slope, but it's kind of spotted with. We've never done a wetland analysis, but if you could see the topography there, it's nothing like the sort of piece of flat field. Yeah, it's pretty. It's not impossible. Nothing's impossible.
Kind of drops off behind mangrove there, and then turns into a pretty wet area. In the
Yeah.
Okay. That was all I had. Thank you.
Yep.
So, Craig, you mentioned at the beginning a benefit of being more of a partner than a vendor. How could this committee assist or be a part of that? How do you see that evolving? Like, in what shape would that be?
I think that, well, like I think said at the end, even if the capacity or was strained, or if there was a desire to enter into some kind of joint venture agreement, as an example, to have the Housing Authority be tasked with doing an RFP or finding a partner to do that with, I think that would be a better deal for the city. We were very close to doing a joint venture, by the way, with POA on the Sherburne School when we ended up being the two finalists. And in fact, I had the board authority to make that happen. In the end, I just felt very strongly that this is a city-owned piece of land. This is not something else. It's a city-owned piece of land, and the PHA is the one that should be doing that. And the deal, you've got you've got developer fees that come in. They're a source of revenue that allows nonprofits to stay in business. And in something like a joint venture arrangement where POA, for instance, is receiving 70% of that developer fee, we almost did it after the fact because we would sure be able to make a better deal with that. In the end, we decided that we did not need that capacity, and that we could do it with the consultants and the team that we had. But just an example of the city's going to get a much better deal on something like that if the PHA is the one that would be the partner on that rather than the competitor on that, in my opinion.
Other questions?
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, a little bit of focus back to the Sherburne project. With your projection of some of the delays that you stated, and the fact that you wanted to incorporate the school in the project, is that school going to be able to withstand, another year of, just standing by or no maintenance, and before, and just to avoid any more deterioration that could be taking place, and you've recognized one with the cupola, so I don't know, but I mean, if the project gets delayed for a particular amount of time, is that school going to be in reasonable shape to invest what you think is necessary to turn it into housing? And is there any plans for you to do any type of work on that to preserve that, to stop any deterioration? So,
Yeah.
right.
there's pretty severe deterioration in some spots there, and I do think it's important. It's survived for a long time, but it's not. It's important to do some maintenance on that now, and make sure that that building is buttoned up. The cupola is actually there's water getting in there. There's some shingles off on the front side that you guys can see, and there's some water getting in there. The structure of the building is very, very solid. It's very structurally sound, but there are places like that that do need some maintenance. Some on the front gable ends, a quality paint job will be sufficient.
Be
we
really
believe.
lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the most.
Especially when students were there, it would have been nice, but yes.
It would have been nice. It
Would have been
would have been nice. So we think that'll be sufficient for those front gable ends, but especially on the south side, or the side towards the Stephen Maureen's, the entire sash, all the trim would need to be completely replaced. That starts to get really expensive. To do that, it's too bad that there was that much deferred maintenance while it was being a school, but that's where it's left. So that's much more involved than a paint job, and and we haven't closed on any financing or anything like that. So finding a source of funds to be able to button that up is really important, and so that's what we're doing now.
So you will be trying to attend to that?
Yes. Yeah.
With no guarantee right now, like you said, anything you do is going to cost.
Right.
And you don't have the particular dedicated funding for that at this time.
Correct. Yeah. John?
Yeah, going forward, the one area that I had the most concern was with regards to the project which was proposed a few years ago, behind Gosling Meadows. And what I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the issue there, frankly, is financing at this point in time. Is that accurate?
It's having a well-conceived and well-developed plan, and then, yes, the financing is always a challenge in New Hampshire. Yeah.
So I guess the question is, that I'm hearing is, why should the city make other land available to you when you have land available that you haven't developed? And that's cutting right through it. So.
Right. One reason is because, when we were talking about Sherburne School, and people were saying this is not the right spot, and there was several people that suggested Gosling Meadows, and went as far as to suggest that there was going to be less of an impact on the neighborhood than doing a project at Sherburne School. The impact on Gosling Meadows is tearing down people's homes. So I would suggest that that's a much greater impact than doing something on city-owned land. So yes, I think that there's some great possibilities there, made much more challenging with starting to relocate families. That can be done, and that was just done in Nashua.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Again, part of what we're here is to ask questions,
Right.
but more importantly, we're here to be educated.
Yep.
And I think that, is there additional land that there is nothing on right now that would be available to be developed?
That's owned currently by the PHA.
Right.
Yes.
No. Yeah, anything that we would do would be a redevelopment project, other than something really small. But it's the same as anything else. You end up putting the same amount of effort potentially into a 127-unit project as you do to add 12-unit project. And I mean, that's a little dramatic, but yeah, same theory. Yeah.
So hopefully my final question, you're suggesting that the PHA wants to be involved in more projects. And one of the issues that some of us had was the fact is that is PHA spreading itself too thin? So I'll ask the question, and if it's something that you're uncomfortable answering, please feel free to tell me. Where do you stand on Lafayette Road?
I hope to be able to share some really positive news soon on that. We're making some accelerated progress there. It has not been easy or cheap to be able to do that, but I hope to be able to talk about that publicly sometime in the near future.
That's fine. You know, I appreciate the answer. I think that, you know, again, one of the concerns which frankly I have and others have is, you know, how many projects can you do at one time? And so the fact that that's going forward is certainly positive, but it also may be a situation where it's using up a significant number of resources and may not fit into taking on additional stuff.
Right.
So anyways, thank you.
No, I think your point is very well taken.
Thank you.
I think the constraint is more about the availability of funding than it is about capacity. We have not built, we've added, we have a good internal capacity, but we haven't built out a whole development team.
Right.
And that's one thing that we could do, or we can, be resourceful and, just like hiring architects and engineers and bringing some people to the table. So, but then again, that's a situation where, being able to direct traffic a little bit that's logical in the confines of what the available resources are it would be a great role for us in the sequencing of that. I don't know where plans are, but Service Credit Union does have a big project going on. We told them, and we spoke to them for about a year. They were very excited to work with the PHA, and we would be very excited to work with them. But if they, and we, thought that 2026 or 2027 tax credit application would be a great fit for them. They were really insistent on trying to get a project into this 2025 round, and we're not going to work with them on two simultaneous projects that are competing with each other. But POA will. So you are facing a situation right now where you could have two projects applying for these scarce amount of tax credits, both competing against each other in the city of Portsmouth.
I don't know if that's a bad thing.
Well, two of them are private sector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Could be.
right, because they're not. I mean, both are not gonna get funded,
Right.
but and we think we would win, but still, your point is well taken. To have stuff in the pipeline and that kind of stuff. But that is a privately owned piece of land. But
Thank you.
Yes.
I had a few questions.
Yeah. Hit it, Tate.
Anything, Jen?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is Gosling, you did some charrettes. There's a possibility for garden-style apartments, but that would have to go in phases just because it's so big. And you'd have to demolish and rebuild in phases. And then there's Woodbury Manor, which is an interesting one next to the senior center. It's low density right now. We could potentially attach a little paper street that's sitting there idle. And then there's Falkland Way and your Atlantic Heights, where we've got a chunk there. Have you ever done any kind of master plan of these opportunities and how you could create additional housing units for rent. That prioritizes which are the easiest, which are the fastest off the mark, or is it all, we can look at the properties, we can see opportunities, but there's no systematic plan of how you might want to create more units.
No, we've penciled out a 10-year, $250 million plan that would either redevelop existing properties or build new properties. This committee has set some really ambitious goals. I think that, we could, if everything were to go really, really well, we would be producing 500 units of housing here with the PHA. So if your goal is to do 500 in, what's the goal?
2 years.
2 years, permitted, not built, but permitted.
Permitted, yeah, every 2 years, then the amount of credits is for this kind of housing, for housing that's funded with low-income housing tax credits. And for example, the Christchurch project will have $8 or $9 million in equity to build a $14 million project. That's why it can stay affordable. And then we've got another, $750 from the Federal Home Loan Bank, and we put this together. So, so it's because we have all that equity is the reason why we can keep it affordable, and that's where the scarcity of these tax credits come into play. But yes, and I'm happy to discuss that with you. A lot of it's speculative,
Yeah, sure.
but in terms of number of units, sequence, and cost, that we've got some estimates to do that. Don't know if I'll be around long enough to do that, but we're a 70-year-old organization, so there'll be
Yeah,
somebody.
I was noticing on some of our minutes that you spoke of that 10-year, $250 million
Yeah.
plan, and I think we've kind of brushed up against it with these various properties.
Yeah, and that includes city-owned land. That includes the publicly owned land in Portsmouth, too.
Right.
Yeah.
So the gating factor really is the competition every year for the 9% tax credits.
Right, yeah. If there's only a third of the projects that are getting funded now, then that's the reality. So we could have a lot of projects that are in the pipeline for projects that are being financed and built with these low-income housing tax credits, but there are, and this is why I'd love to have Ryan Pope come down and present to you, so to sort of understand where the constraints are in that pipeline.
Right. Last question. But the 4% tax credits are not as competitive, right?
They're not as competitive. Part of what makes those deals work are the additional capital subsidy that comes from this affordable housing fund. So New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority announced 3 months ago maybe that they will not even consider any applications that require any additional capital subsidy. They've also stopped with their supportive housing program that was smaller, but anything that was in line for any kind of supported or assisted type of housing is now off the table as well. So there are more of these, the 4% credits, you're right, that, the 9% credits are designed to, pay for 70% of a project cost. The 4% credits are designed to pay about 30% of a project cost. So they are, they're less desirable, but
Right.
they're still a source.
Yeah, that was my, could you swing a project with just the 4%?
I don't know who. I'm sure it's done with a mix, maybe with a mix of market rate and affordable. We anticipate that Sherburne School will be what they call a twin deal, so we'll use both 9% and 4% tax credits to make that happen.
Okay. Other questions? Thanks, Craig.
Thank
Very
you all.
helpful. And, we'll
Very
keep
informative.
in mind that long-range plan and maybe have more conversation about how we work with you on that.
Yeah, be delighted to.
Clearly, the waiting list gets longer.
Yeah, we have
The
about
demand is larger.
1,300 households that are on our waiting list right now, so for sure. Yep.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Do you want to have public comment now or wait till the end?
For your reasoning behind the
Well, we
suggestion.
just had the presentation. People may have thoughts that they want to express. And sometimes we get to the end and we're crushed for time, so just a thought.
Yeah, we could, is that a motion? If you want to make that motion to
I'll make a motion. I'll limit it. What time is it now?
7:35.
Yeah, see, we're cutting it close as it is. If we could have public comments and limit comments to 3 minutes each, then we should be able to get that done.
I'll
Sound good?
second the motion.
Okay.
Everyone cool? Aye, great.
Yep.
We will open public comment. Please come to the mic and state your name.
That was a great presentation. Very informative. Jim Smalley, let's see if I can get this to work right here. So what I want to talk about is the glass ceiling of affordability. You may have heard there's much talk about tariffs these days. And regardless of whether you favor them or not, tariffs are a form of protectionism, protecting the incumbent. Tariffs are inflationary. They also reduce competition. Consumer pays a tariff, with the poorest among us being hit the hardest. Like tariffs, Portsmouth's current zoning is a form of protectionism. The incumbent property owners are the ones who are protected. Like tariffs, Portsmouth's zoning is also inflationary. Price of land, home ownership, renting, all growing at a rate faster than inflation. Like tariffs, Portsmouth zoning also reduces competition. Supply of housing is artificially, intentionally constrained. This benefits the incumbent at the expense of the consumer, as the incumbent gains through price appreciation at the expense of those who can't necessarily afford that artificially increased price. How about a show of hands for those who found joy in their latest tax bill? Good. The city's budget is driven by personnel costs. I don't know, 2/3 or so, right? Council provides pay raises to offset the high cost of living in the city. The city's current zoning is a major driver of the high cost of living. Those who don't like their tax bill should fight to change the zoning, right, make it more affordable. This past Monday, Councilors Bagley and Cook proposed the planning department come back with a list, just a broad list of principles of zoning rules that limit supply. Another one of the good councilors subsequently proposed an amendment saying that what was proposed was too simple. There's greater complexity there. Bagley and Cook's proposal was then amended. I believe this good councilor conflated what is a simple, broad-based list of supply constraints with the potential political response to that list. The basic ones are well known: mandated parking requirements, minimum lot sizes, height restrictions, FAR ratios, etc. Right? So I'm just hoping this committee comes back with that list so the community clearly understands what is limiting supply. Right? Just put it on the table. Why not discuss it? Right? And let the response happen. Again, great presentation from Craig. Very much appreciated. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Future Huda, 2A South Street. So it's sitting here and listening to Mr. Welch's presentation. On Monday night, the city manager had announced at the end a verbal that the ground lease was signed with PHA and another document. So when Mr. Anderson asked the question on who maintains the property until the shovels go in the ground, I do believe it's in the budget for us as taxpayers to do that. But since the ground lease was signed, I have no idea what's in there. I don't know if you have any idea what's in there, but my question would be, when does the ground lease commence, and when are the taxpayers off the hook for maintaining that property, especially in this financial environment? So if we go, just for example, if we're going to get stretched out another year, and then if I heard Mr. Welch explain this correctly, we could or could not move forward at that time. My concern is who picks up the tab for the maintenance on the school and the property for that length of time. I don't know what was in the ground lease. I'm sure Mr. Welch can explain it to us, but that's a concern that I would have in listening to the presentation at this point in time, because that means that going forward, it's unknown as to when this is going to flip over, and the taxpayers will not be actually paying for the maintenance there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Anyone else?
There's one on Zoom, but I don't know if you'd like to speak or make public comment, raise your hand on Zoom. Or, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is 2025 committee goals. As we've discussed over the last few months, we still have the matrix that was put together by our former housing navigator. And I believe at the last meeting and the meeting before that, I asked everyone to come up with some of the ideas, simplified, essentially predating the request from the Councillor Cook and Councillor Bagley to start looking at some of the zoning items that we can tackle. So I guess we will open it up for discussion of some of the items that we want to put on that list, and that list will be the target of this committee going forward for the next few months. Not necessarily removing any of the conversation in the last year, but moving forward within the goals of this council. I'm sorry, this committee. Okay, Byron?
Yeah, I mean, it was just more on, I think the Cook-Bagley motion, I think, is a good example of, and then also the recent sort of zoning discussion, I don't know if it's a zoning discussion, I suppose it is, on the co-living changes. I feel like there's a little bit of a, as this committee sits, the information isn't necessarily flowing in the best way in terms of our understanding of the goals, and then also there's that conversation happening. My hope is, and this isn't articulated well, that not that we would be an impediment to the changes that would be happening, but sort of just making sure that we're in the information flow relative to those happenings. Just so, and to your point around this list, it'd be nice if those weren't different lists, right? I think is yeah.
So part of the broader conversation that this committee is technically not involved in per se is that we're going to be going and the planning board is starting the master plan, and that is dictated by RSA that is a planning board project. But the goal is that we can have impact on. My goal is that we can have impact on any zoning recommendations to also bring to the planning board. I understand what you're saying. It feels like there's a lot of ships, planes flying in the air at the same time. Well, I do agree with you that a lot of times that is frustrating. I think one of the benefits to that is that if we come to the planning board with our recommendation and then another group has the same recommendation and another group has the same recommendation, then it to me becomes very solidified that is a recommendation that needs to be taken in account of the master plan.
Okay.
So while I do agree with you that we don't want to be spinning wheels and something else. I will say, for an example, like the co-living came because a developer brought that forward.
Right.
And so that was somewhat tied into a project. That conversation got initiated by the tie-in of a project. And we're seeing that more with kind of different, now there's the big conversation is more, instead of the co-living, more kind of whether we want to expand some of the housing zoning in the gateways, or what just happened with the GNOD. Does that make sense to now look at some of those other areas off of the gateway that have not been allowed housing? Does it make sense to, as we talk about revamping and rezoning some of our single family, does it make sense that now we need to start looking at areas that we can upzone? Which is something that's been talked about at planning board and in master planning projects, but hasn't gained a lot of support over the last year. I'm a big fan of upzoning. Put a duplex where a single family home is, something on like Richards Ave. A lot of those homes are multifamily. A lot of the ones on Union Street that still occupy a single family lot. So trying to be proactive in that way, I think, will hopefully help push along a lot of these changes and potentially bring changes forward before the master plan is completed.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. I think maybe like on the co-living thing specifically, it would have been maybe advantageous to have this group at least have a conversation about that, and maybe have some input that could be additive to those changes.
Yeah, and I did talk to Rick Chelman about that.
Yeah.
They had, we looked at dates that we could possibly line up, and unfortunately, they were a jump ahead of us.
Yeah, and I don't want to be an impediment at all. Like, certainly, yeah.
And also, they were doing a really good job at it. They had 3 work sessions, looked at co-housing, co-living all around the country, and they were well down the tracks.
So, but I think what I'm kind of taking away from what you said is when we build our list, kind of look at, well, who else is looking at these things? So that, say, if co-living was on our list and it had not gone as far as it had in the planning board, well, then we can take it over. But if it's on our list and they're passing an ordinance to change, at least in downtown, well, we can remove that from our list for downtown. Is that where, like, not double dipping on some of these items? Is that?
Yeah, I just, to some degree, I think more what I'm looking for is making sure that this group is aware of all of those flows going in through, like, if ultimately, like, zoning changes is, like, where the streams are converging, right? You know, making sure that, you know, and some of that's just on us to make sure that we're, like, paying attention to all those things. But I think to some degree, like, maybe even having, as part of the packet, right, just, like, a list of ongoing things that are in the streams so that we have that vision.
Yeah. I think the goal, and unfortunately I think part of this is a scheduling issue, is including a member of the planning board on this committee was hopefully going to do that. But I think we'll make sure as chairs and maybe staff to try to build some of that in more, for sure. John? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to go in a little bit different direction, but I'm going to pick up what Byron was talking about. I think one of the issues that I see us dealing with, and I don't want to meet more often, but because we only meet once a month, you know, things happen within the month that we aren't aware of. For instance, I watched the meeting the other night, part of it, and then watched it on YouTube afterwards. First of all, I want to congratulate Mary for the job that she did.
Yes.
Those who may not be aware, Mary spoke at the meeting and presented how we came to the process we followed for selecting sites and how we came to the sites, and did a wonderful job. But one of the issues I had, frankly, with it is that when I looked at the agenda, I see Mary speaking for the committee, and I know nothing about it. I might suggest that between meetings, if something happens, that we know about it. I have no problem with what happened. I just wish that I didn't have to ask the question, what is she doing there? If, we'd gotten a little email or something, say that the co-chairs had decided it would be a good idea to have a member of the committee speak before the council, and they'd asked Mary to, wonderful. But and the other thing is, again, picking up on the whole thing, the manager, presented at the meeting that she had had a discussion with the condo association up on Granite Street and that they weren't interested. Well, I would think that we would be notified that that discussion had taken place, so that we as the committee who made that suggestion wouldn't have to hear about it secondhand. So I think that those are the types of things that I think, again, I'm picking up a little bit, but I think what I got out of Byron's comment was the fact is that there seems to be at times, a lack of communication, and I just asked that be. And I think the other thing too is that some of it has to do with the dynamics of the political system here. You would think that if a couple of councilors had something that they wanted to talk about this committee doing, that they would have spoken to somebody about it as opposed to putting it on their agenda. But that's just the dynamics, especially as I said to someone the other day, it may be a little bit early, but it looks like people are running already. So anyways, that's my comment.
Yeah, and that was great, totally understandable. I will say that no other counselor, as you know, has any control of what another counselor puts on.
I understand that. No.
Oftentimes, agenda items are found out by counselors at the same time they're found out by the public. I can understand about Mary. That was kind of in response to some of the community questions and came about very short in a short amount of time. There was a lot of community question about this committee's recommendation about the lower lot. So we felt it was prudent for the community to not just hear from the council, but totally understand on that. Yeah. As it comes from and this is just in response to what you said, the city manager, again, it was brought up for this committee, so that action was requested of her. We had not met, and that information wasn't made public until Monday. So that would have come to this committee as a response. Yeah. That information just wasn't made public until Monday. Right. We didn't meet till Thursday.
No, that's fine.
There is the conversation to have in this committee, and I don't necessarily know that we need to have a vote on it today, as we are missing, several members, of whether it makes sense when we get more into some of the intense work like we had in the beginning. I understand, I would say not over the summer, but maybe whether that means leading into the fall or kind of the end of this academic year, increasing the meetings that we have if we're looking at actual change of items to increase that flow again. I know that we had gone back and forth as a committee to say, hey, right now we'll turn it, we'll go back to just one. We've been open to going to two. So that may be something, as we do get into some of this more intense work, that might make sense, or subcommittees of the committee, as we've kind of done before. So.
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So if we're ready to go, Mr. Anderson, and then we'll go to the list, because
while we're here, and in reference to what John's mentioned, but I mean just a summary of where we're at. I think we owe ourselves the honesty and the reality of what we've accomplished against what is potentially possible. And we made two recommendations to the city council for two pieces of property, the lower lot and Granite Ave. Granite Ave is closed. We feel from some of the discussion from the city manager that possibility is diminished. And I'm not a betting man, but I think the lower lot has got a lot of challenges to it, whether it's from the community or not, or whatever.
Or construction up here.
What's that?
Or construction in City Hall, too.
Yeah.
Right. So, in trying to assess the good work that we've done, we really don't have any available properties for developing, for development in the future. Outside of what Craig mentioned, and we weren't aware of that.
And I
you
think
know?
that's, one of the reasons like that we've discussed as a committee, moving on from the discussions of city-owned property as we made that vote a few weeks ago and put that then in the hands of the council and city manager. And as we stated in the beginning of the year and a half ago almost, is we didn't want to just focus on that. We wanted to make sure that we looked at parking regulations, zoning, all of those things. And so now I feel, as we've discussed as a committee, and I think the committee agreed a couple meetings ago, that it is now time to, we finalized for now, we ended that chapter and we're moving to the next chapter of the committee. Doesn't mean we won't revisit that at some point. We don't know what parcel with GNOD, we don't know if we're going to recommend any zoning like GNOD, which could allow the city to inherit or receive other buildable parcels. But for right now, the recommendation has been put forward, and now that this committee is moving on.
No, and that's fair. I think it's just time, periodically it's time to assess what we've done, where it's gone, where it's going, and I feel we've done a lot of good work, but I mean, presently, the result of our work hasn't really translated to a lot of progress.
I would.
I'm not,
before we go down this rabbit hole, Mr. Anderson, I think that is your personal opinion, and you're entitled to that. So before we go down this rabbit hole, I want to get us back on track because we really only have people have children and people have to get home, so we have a limited amount of time.
Folks have come prepared, so we should honor that.
Okay, so back to the goals.
So we asked each of you to come up with one or two things that you think would be productive for committee and staff energy to go into.
I'll kick it off, sure. It's sort of like growing off of one of my goals, but I really think that we need to be focusing on how are we going to keep people who are currently in any sort of housing in the city in their homes, and how can we support them in that. There can be individuals who maybe are struggling to cover any sort of like cost associated with home maintenance, and is that going to set them back? But I just think we need to kind of start thinking outside of the box a little bit, and how can we preserve and make sure, because we don't want it to be that I leave this housing situation and now I'm in the bucket with the other 1,300 families that are trying to get into housing. So I just want us to really start thinking about how we can sort of sustain what we currently have, and maybe it's having conversations like I know we have some of those areas that are like at the sun setting on some of these like programs to help protect them for lesser costs, and what conversations can we have, or how can we address it to keep it going?
And what conversations have we had? Because I know that PHA in the city in some of those instances have had conversations, and
right.
We've shared, but I agree with you.
Yeah. So that's just kind of where I'm at.
The Housing Trust Fund or any number of vehicles.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like we talked about the Housing Trust Fund, but we were looking at it through the lens of just adding more housing, and I think we need to also be looking at the preservation of. So.
Great.
That's great. John?
I have a question more than a point. John, you mentioned at the council meeting the other day about the grant and...
The HOP 2.0.
What's that?
The HOP 2.0 grant.
And can you explain that and what it does? Because that has to do with zoning, correct?
We're going to turn to you guys.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a grant that RKG, who's a consultant who's worked with us before, is looking at our zoning, and they're actually going to be ready to report out. We're looking at a tentative meeting date of the end of April, April 28th. Is that the right date? Yeah. April 28th, to have them present. They've taken a look at the zoning where you can do housing, so the gateway zoning, the GNOD, and looking at what the gateway could do differently to maybe change the incentives to make it more appealing for developers to build affordable housing in those areas. So looking at densities, looking at what the zoning requires now, how that would work. That's the real big effort. I think that's the majority of it. Mm-hmm. And they want to try to present that to the community, and I think this committee would be a really important role in seeing that and then giving feedback. And we'd open it up to anybody in the community as well. But that's where they're at with that.
Now, because at one point, say a year or so ago, when we were talking about various things, and I think it was part of the co-living discussion, what things have come before the planning department that you believe we could address to, to help with the housing issue. This is going to be part of that, correct?
That's right. That could lead to zoning changes. I mean, we changed a lot of areas, OR and some other
Right.
commercial zones to gateway.
Right.
Which we've seen the density in the gateway is not at a scale that all the development is taking advantage of the workforce opportunities that are in there. So how do we adjust that? How do we provide different incentives? They're very technical on how they review it, so they'll provide a good basis for what we could change it to potentially, or what's, what the issues are with that. And then I think it could lead to zoning recommendations right there, or at least when they're in the report that they complete.
So the idea of us looking at what zoning changes can be made would be, it's already taking place.
Well, it's not everything.
Okay.
It's not like.
That's why I'm asking.
It's not like the motion that was on the council agenda to look at all the barriers, but it's certainly looking at the barriers that we've identified.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
What else has got?
I would add upzoning, as I just talked about.
Yeah.
I think to me that is where we can make the biggest impact without losing what we pride ourselves as individual neighborhoods of that feel. I think about the project on Sagamore Ave that was looking to turn a single-family ranch into a duplex that got denied while it's across from apartment and condo complexes because it is zoned single community. So I think that is a good thing for us to, in my head, literally pick a city map and say, like, well, this area looks like it can work in this area, and then flesh it out within the committee and staff.
Is that the same as gentle density?
That's what I call it.
Yeah. To some degree. I also think,
I'm just looking at this one.
yeah. So this was the thumb down one, I think, right? I didn't say down. I meant the turn down one.
Yeah.
In some degree, I view gentle density as also like what's happening at the old Bed Bath & Beyond, because that's like you're almost kind of like building a neighborhood that's pretty dense, but it's not having a huge effect on other neighborhoods. It's obviously going to reflect on traffic and all of that things. But I mean, I have no problem if people call upzoning gentle density also.
When we finished the meeting of the 13th, March 13th, Jen, you had said doing more of what we did to liberate office research and turn it to Gatehouse.
I don't think I used the word liberate, but I definitely, I absolutely should have.
Well, liberation's got some.
I'm going to throw out the flag.
Yeah, more shots on goal.
Yeah, more shots on goal. And I really clicked down on that one because I know that the Land Use Committee said, this is a lot, but let's get this done first. And there's a second pass, I think, to go back and look at areas that are office industrial, office research, that we don't need them to be. And I think there's opportunities there. Is that what you were thinking?
It's on my list.
What else have you got?
I also have brought up a couple times this idea of a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes or a TIF, and I know that it can be done in New Hampshire, but I don't know enough about how.
So should we invite Roseanne to come? Because we do some
legal.
Well, yes, but I think that's going to be covered a little bit in this
The
RKG
RKG.
presentation. It'd be a great question if it's not covered.
Great.
To ask, because he's really good at that kind of.
It's unfortunate that that's during New Hampshire school vacation week, but
Yeah, I feel like we might need
We
to.
don't have to pick that date.
Yeah, look at.
I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
No, we
also
want the
gone.
housing committee to be part of it, so.
Yeah.
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 We're all gone.
Yeah.
They're all gone.
I think a
Probably
lot
why it works for them.
I think a lot of the council might be
going to
gone
Disney?
today.
That's where I'm going.
Vacation week.
I'll be there.
Actually, it was a Monday and it's not a city council
Yeah.
meeting. so
Yes.
it's not a review.
We'll figure that out. Because I think the city council only meets once in May because we have a bunch of budget.
Maybe the next week.
Yeah.
And I think
Make the
we
next week
meet
work.
twice, but a lot of work sessions.
Yes, a lot of work sessions. Oh, yeah,
Tracy, did you have?
Well, I mean, I think zoning is the biggest impact item, but we've talked about that. Beyond that, it just seems with the current climate that the private sector is going to kind of have to come to the rescue. So whatever we can do to encourage that, I think would help if there's some way to partner with private developers. But they have the capital, whereas the state and federal funding sources are challenging, unpredictable at best. So, and then just going back to a few of the financing thoughts to assist, not necessarily build new, but just to assist. I think there are some good ideas that were listed on this matrix to try to add to whether it's a housing trust fund or some other means of distributing assistance through various fees or incentives or taxes or whatever, just to kind of reshuffle it a little bit to get some more money flowing through that.
Great.
Yep, great.
Might be, well, never mind. I don't know how much. I was just thinking it might be nice to figure out from Jody where she feels that there, who is our welfare director, because there is assistance that's mandated by the state that every municipality has to, emergency funding. But it might be interesting to know kind of where that ends and where that kind of gap begins, and how many people and what type of assistance she's seeing requested that she can't meet. So maybe she's seeing X amount of rental, and and it's in a higher demographic than the state allows funding for.
Right.
So kind of playing off yours, and yeah.
And I think Tracy, and it still sticks with me, talked about the fact that somebody loses their apartment, can find one, but doesn't have the money for the deposit. Those are the types of things that, and again, I had an issue with that, but I think there's a way to work around it, and I think that that's certainly a need there.
Now, do we want to dive into always the ugly part of the conversation, which is parking? Do we want to look at the restrictive parking and how that has affected some of the projects?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll put parking down.
Or transportation
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah.
I'm looking.
Beth had some really eloquent idea to remove parking. Was it from zoning
To
and
site plan removal.
Yeah, to site
Right.
plan
Yes.
review.
Is that anything? Has that gone anywhere, or is it still just a great idea that Beth had?
She
No,
wants to talk
the
about
planning
moving
board
parking.
wants to do that.
Peter, yeah.
The planning board wants to do that. It's on the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving it out
Yeah, I
of
think
zoning and into site plan, right?
As the planning board composition's changed, I think the current planning board is up for that.
Everything cycles.
Everything cycles.
Yeah.
So I keep thinking of all the hotel rooms we have in town, and growing up in a hotel family, I know that there's a huge vacancy ratio at some times, of course not here in the summer, but perhaps in winter. We also have a growing percentage of empty second homes in Portsmouth. We have a lot of housing here. A lot of it's empty. Is there any way to capture that? I think we need to just roll up our sleeves and get creative. For example, with the hotels, is there any way to do a pillow tax, and maybe there's an incentive to repeal that pillow tax if they rent their empty vacant rooms to someone who needs assistance? Maybe there's some way to do that.
Are you suggesting a city pillow tax in addition?
I'm not a tax expert. I don't know
No,
how it
I
works.
just was
but
trying to follow your.
I'm trying to find some way to incentivize property owners to allow people who need housing to use their empty buildings.
Yeah. Well, it is a struggle. I know, as most people know, the pillow tax, or as it was as it was eloquently changed from a pillow tax to a fee to help municipalities with the cost of the influx of tourism.
Yeah,
for police
and
and roads and maintenance.
on the chopping block right now.
But this as it is as the current framework is the farthest that any type of bill as this has gone. The unfortunate is that it just doesn't seem to have the votes in Concord. And so without the enabling legislation, we cannot do it. It's the same that hotels are not, from my understanding, taxed on like revenue, their assessment. It's not like, hey, you've rented out 5,000 rooms over the year for $700 a night. Here, here's your actual, value as a building, as a property. They're only taxed on the actual physical assessment of the building and the land, and so there's kind of that missing.
I have a lot of hotel thoughts as an owner of 3 of them in town, but don't forget that they do
Bring
pay
a lot of
taxes.
Yes.
And I mean, while I commend the creative thinking, I have personally, it would be a very challenging idea to enact, just because you are running a business, and it would be the same as like, oh, Cup of Joe has an empty seat, we should feed people for less because she has an empty seat, like that.
Yeah.
Right. It starts to just feel like you're overburdening one particular side of the equation.
Yeah.
I go back to this idea of like, let's just make the opportunity bigger for creating housing in general.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I look at.
Sorry, Tracy.
It's
I had to, or else my partners will be very upset.
I look at the overnight stay fee that. There are hundreds of municipalities around the country that have these fees. You go to New York, you go to Boston, and those are just pass-through fees, like at a restaurant, an 8.5% meals and rooms fee. So I think that's more of a revenue item, and my unfortunate hope is as we see a potential reduction of state revenues, as we have seen over the last 5 years, that we're going to have to be creative at some point as a state to increase revenue, and to me that is one of the lower impacts of a $2 a night type item. So hopefully those in Concord will think about. And the great thing, as we know in New Hampshire, is that just because the law is passed in Concord does not mean that every town and municipality need to adopt that RSI. But yeah, it is a fight. It is a fight. Is there anything else besides these 10 or so that we want to, and then we can wrap it up? It's 7:15.
I think I'm going to toss out an idea of that we should have a work session and ask about this question of zoning impediments, but have landlords, have developers come in and tell us what they see the obstacles be.
Should we also have maybe a report, a not very, it doesn't need to be super detailed, but a report out of applications that have been denied or had to be modified based on zoning? I think of several that have come up in the last year that have been denied or have had to have extreme modifications due to being denied at the planning board. You can look at the Hanover Street project, which went for another almost complete redesign. Obviously, the co-living space. We have the space on State Street.
You mean the zoning board?
Yeah. Okay. Did I say?
You said planning board.
I meant BOA.
Right. Well, hear from developers, hear from staff where we've seen these restrictions stop things cold. Hear from some of these advocacy groups.
If I could expand it to, it's not just stopping it, but sometimes the process is really, really slow. And you might end up, I'm thinking about Bartlett Street, like, yes, that building is going to start being built, but behind Ritchie Lumber, but it took 6 years.
I was going to say 4 years later.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And, that drives up cost.
It also, I think, drives up community impact. So I think,
it's a barrier to entry.
Yeah, and I think about right now what's happening kind of in the north end, where people feel like there's so much construction. Well, those projects were in the pipeline for years, and it could have been phased if there wasn't for potential litigation and X, Y, and Z. And
Litigation you can't handle.
yeah, but part of it
Well,
again is.
I would argue that you could probably, maybe not at the municipal level. I would liberate your thinking.
But now I think you see less of that through the housing court.
Right.
And
That's what I was referring to.
now there are mechanisms that say to people, if you just throw out these frivolous lawsuits, you're going to be responsible for
think they're
lawyers'
getting rid of
fees,
that.
for things like I know.
Like 2 years.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I know this conversation is geared, but within the realm of the scope of our focus on affordable housing, a lot of what we just discussed with the North End, are all market rate issues. They're all market rate issues, and that makes the struggle of what we want to do just a little bit more difficult from a zoning perspective, because liberating some of the zoning issues presents more opportunity for market rate housing, and not that that's contrary to what it just challenges us to come up with the right type of zoning mixture that's going to benefit the purpose of this group, which is affordable housing.
Yeah, and we need both, right? I mean, we need below market rate if we want to have housing for every income level. But we would like to, I think, have as much housing unit growth in the private sector as we can, because we don't have enough rentals. Clearly, our rental market has no vacancies.
Unhealthy.
Yeah. So, how can we encourage more units of rental housing? How can we encourage somewhere close to middle-class housing, market rate housing? Those are big challenges, but I think we need both.
Okay, so we have our list. Maybe we'll get that into we'll move from our matrix to just this list.
Can we email it out?
Yeah, we can email it out.
Yeah, great.
And then we'll start setting up some of the invited guests for our next.
Do we have our next meeting set?
Right now,
I guess it would be May 8th if it's the second Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not here, but don't let that stop you, kids.
The work session, one of the things we do in the council for the budget is we do like 2 or 3 hours worth, but we just do it all at once. So maybe think about, what if we got input from developers, from staff, from the planning board? We did it all in one couple-hour stretch. If that's
It's a little
not
hard at night to do, I feel like, anything for a couple hours.
Yeah,
stretch.
well, maybe.
Yeah. We'll figure
Or
it
we
out.
could spread it out over multiple sessions, but that means we probably can't do once a month. We got to do frequent than once a month. So,
Well, hopefully by the next meeting, we will be able, before the next meeting, hopefully we'll be able to, or in the month of May, we'll be able to hand out the RKG, right?
RKG, yeah.
RKG, I always say RGK. RKG report to this committee too.
The report won't be a report.
I'm sorry.
This is just the first
It's
public.
more like a public engagement.
Just kidding.
Presentation.
Don't listen to me then.
Okay.
But it will have.
But you'll let us
but it will
know
have
another email
information. Yeah, we'll
when
pick
that's
a new
going to
date.
happen.
Yes,
I mean-
okay.
We
Okay,
won't be logging in remotely, but
thank you.
I suppose.
Thanks, everybody.
we are good for the evening. Thanks, Kev.
Does that mean you're going on your